Good evening. The City of Bothell Planning Commission meeting for Wednesday, July 29th will come to order. Do we have any, let the record show all commissioners are present and accounted for except for Commissioner Cecil, who is absent and excused. Hearing no non-agenda public comments, no minutes to approve. I don't believe we have any new business. And so we'll move right to the continuation of the public hearing from last week. And it's a continued public hearing for code amendments regarding preliminary plat approval expiration times. And Mr. Gary Hassard, I think we have at least a brief presentation that hopefully summarizes what we discussed last week.
Thanks, Steve. Good evening, Commission. I don't have a formal presentation for you, but in your packet I provided you with a summary of your deliberations last week, and hopefully I captured those accurately for you. In addition, based on those deliberations and the direction you gave me, I provided some proposed language for you for the code amendment. Be happy to work through that with you, answer any questions you might have, and do any wordsmithing you might want to do. The one option you have in that language is whether you want to go with 1 or 2 years. So I look forward to that direction from you, and with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Gary. Yeah, I had a chance to review the packet and review the language that you put together. I thought it reflected our discussion very, very well. So are there any initial questions of Gary of the language in the packet, any in the presentation at all? Commissioner Cabe.
Just want to make sure I understand this correctly. Gary, last time we talked about any applications that were expiring by, I think, December 31st, 2015, applying under this change language. This appears to be anything that was applied for and approved prior to December 31st, 2014. So technically the window now could be proposals through 2023, correct? Through December 31st, 2023, if someone turned one in right before the first of the year.
That's correct. We're talking about 7-year plats, so they would have 7 years from the December 31st, 2014 approval time, theoretically. I'm not sure that we had any that were actually approved that late, but we do, as you know, have at least one that was approved in October of that year. And I hope my explanation of the way I wrote the language made sense, because you had talked about the possibility of cutting these off at December, I think, 2016. But if you think about the 7-year approval time, that would actually cut out a lot of 7-year plats that would have approval through potentially 2021. So that's why I wrote it the way I did. I didn't change any of the language in the existing code language about dates. The dates have all stayed the same. So that's why you see 2014, not 15.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I don't think we want to penalize, someone that's coming in after the 2015 or 2016.
Is there any discussion around whether we should hold it to the end of 2014? Should we make this even earlier? Plats 2013, 2012. Do we want to go there? Commissioner Clark.
I'm still confused. I thought I understood this last week, and now I'm not so sure I did. Could you, Gary, clarify real quick, the December 31st, 2014 date, is it any plat that was a preliminary plat that was approved before that date automatically has the 7 years, and we would therefore be giving them, at their request, an additional 2 years?
That's my understanding, yes.
Oh.
So the language that Council adopted to help out developers during the recession went through the recession and a little bit beyond. And Bothell really didn't feel the effects of the recession in the peak recession years. We were actually still finaling permits in pretty large numbers, in the hundreds, through 2007, 2008, 2009. And it wasn't really until 10, 11, and 12 that we really started to see a fall off. And in 9, 10, 11, and I think 12, we dropped into the 70, 80, 90 dwelling units completed range from about 200, 300 for the previous years. So the recession hit some communities during the peak years of 7, 8, and 9, but it really didn't hit us until later.
Could I jump in here? So on the 2014 date, I'd like to clarify that as well. So is the 2014 date the date of any time up until the end of December 2014 of when it would, of when there would be a preliminary approval, or is that when the date of when a plat might have expired? And we're looking at making an extension beyond that. I guess what I'm saying is I'm not tracking with why it's necessary for plats that were approved in 2014 need this special extension.
I agree.
I'm kind of, and I'm even wondering about 2013. I mean,
Okay.
in my mind, my tracking was, or my thinking on this was, it had to do with the incredibly unique Great Recession that we went through between 08 and 2010, 2011, perhaps. But I'm just not seeing why a plat that received preliminary approval, say in December of 2014, needs this special extension. But am I correct there? Or, I mean, I'd like to know the thoughts of the other.
I totally agree with you. And I think, and I guess I'm interested to know what the intent of the previous amendment was that extended it to 7 years. Because in my mind, what makes sense is that it seems like there were the plats that really benefited from this were the ones that were kind of the 06, 07 approvals. And so they would have, without the 7 years, would have expired in 11, 12, which was, again, we're starting to come out of that recession, but we're not there yet. And so I thought the 7 years then would give those kind of a 13, 14, time frame to work with. And now we were saying we're working on extending that to kind of a 15, 16 sort of thing. That was my understanding last week. So if that's not, is that, I don't, maybe other.
Well, and I think there's a little confusion that I have over whether we're talking, whether that date applies to when the period between preliminary and final would expire, or the beginning of, I mean, now that we're talking about 2023, or potentially a 9-year period, I mean, we're talking about plats that got preliminary approval up till the end of 2014, having 9 years. I'm not there in terms of that being necessary, but I'd just like to kind of.
Well, I think all along we've been talking about plats that received 7-year approval, potentially having 9 years.
Right.
The question, I think, the confusion is just how many does that affect?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let me read the language out as it exists now, and maybe just reading it out loud will help clarify it.
Yep.
A final plat meeting all the requirements of Chapter 5817 RCW and this title shall be submitted to the city for approval within 5 years of the date of preliminary plat approval, except that through December 31st, 2014, such a final plat shall be submitted to the city for approval within 7 years of the date of preliminary plat approval. So I think the way that was adopted by council was that if you received preliminary plat approval up to December 31st, 2014, you then had 7 years.
So this is language that the city council has already approved and
That's
is in the
correct.
code today. Okay.
So I didn't want to change that
Yeah.
criteria. I didn't want to parse that out to just a smaller subset or change it at all. So I simply left that language the way it is because that's as it reads now, and applied. And then this extension would apply to everything that applied to.
Okay.
So then, if you're uncomfortable with that time frame being extended even further out, you might think about a 1-year extension versus a 2 or.
Well,
Commissioner Cabe?
I've got just a quick suggestion. What I was expecting, I guess, was continuing on with what you were reading, Gary, is for plats which meet the criteria, I would say set to expire in 12/31/15, then we would go into the 1 versus 2 year, but we would kind of limit it to plat applications that are going to expire just within the remainder of the year. But that complicates applications down the road. Is that what you're thinking?
No, I
I'm making it
don't think it would. I think that's an option you would have. I was trying to, I think by trying to make it as simple as possible, maybe I made it more complicated to understand. But I was trying to work with the date that the council approved
Right.
for the recession hit developers and just go with that date. But as I pointed out in my explanation, that does push it out, potentially for some of them, to 2021. So,
Yeah, Commissioner Clark.
So, I like what you said, Patrick, Commissioner Cave. I think if we could figure out a way to kind of partially uncouple this from the December 31st, 2014, and I think, again, thinking about the plats that we anticipate, and if you think about the subject plat that was kind of the reason that this thing came up, it's set to expire in October of this year, is what I understand.
yes.
Those are the plats, I think. And so if that's in October 15 of 15,
So
that would
Jumonka
mean
received its approval in 2008.
2008.
Now, that was the beginning of the bottom of the recession.
Right. Yeah. So,
But again, when looking at the number of dwelling units permits that we completed, and that means issued, not just approved, but actually issued, so developers were coming in and picking up permits for them, we didn't really see a drop-off until about 2010 in Bothell. We were still cranking out a lot of permits, handing them across the counter to developers to actually build units in 8, 9, and it wasn't really until 10, 11 that we really saw a significant drop-off. So looking at those numbers, I didn't want to potentially exclude some of those developers who really struggled in 10 and 11.
and I agree with that. I think what I'm going to suggest, or at least throw out there for consideration, is that we define a date that we think applies, whether it be maybe it's 12/31 of 2011, and any plat approved prior to that has not yet expired would get that additional 2 years, so that they would effectively get well, geez, that would put them through 2018 or
Or potentially 9 years. I mean, it would be
Yeah.
2020 if they were,
Yeah.
it was 2011.
Yeah, so that's exactly what it does, and that's
So
what I was trying to
and
explain.
I think the 2011 plats are more likely, that were approved in 2011, are more likely to be able to be developed by the 2018 deadline they currently have, because the recession's over, they should be, the market's back and that kind of thing. Again, I think I think it's the earlier ones that we're most concerned about, and I would even argue that the plats approved in 2006 and 2007, which currently are expired by the current code,
Correct?
maybe ought to benefit from the, I don't know that we can do that. I'm guessing that if they're expired, they're
They're
expired.
expired, that's correct.
So maybe we go back to the best we can do, which is whatever plats that have not expired, in other words, they would have been approved prior to or after July 29th of 2008, would be eligible, if they request it, to get a 2-year extension and make that sunset at, maybe that's only for 2 years or something like that, or maybe it's just 08 and 09 or something. Because I think what we're trying to do is we're trying to just add a little bit of time onto the ones that are expiring right now.
Yes.
And so the 7-year could still apply to plats approved up through 2014, but the 2-year extension might only, the additional 2 years might only apply to plats that are really set to expire right now.
Okay, got you.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, any questions, comments to Commissioner Clark's points? I guess I would just say I'm in agreement with that.
Okay.
I mean, in terms of my thinking and as far as flexibility and extension, all around that. And so, yeah, I'm glad Commissioner Kay brought this up, because I actually had circled it on my notes. The 2014 date, I was just not clear on. And now, what you're saying is that this was language approved by the city council.
That's correct.
And so, in a sense, they had their reasons, and we're trying to make sure we understand what their reasons were. But I would like to have us kind of put forth our thinking to the city council, and if they want to change it, they can change it. But let me just finish my point, and then Commissioner Vliet. So I'm tracking and in agreement with Commissioner Clark's points around this affecting plats approved earlier.
Okay.
Something along the lines of that were approved maybe in 09, maybe 010, maybe 10, and that they could benefit from it, but it might even be earlier. It might be '08, especially if we're talking about 9 years, and a plat approved in '08 would be able to go to 2017. That's 2 years. I mean, I think that's more than enough time for final approval. So I'm even saying, unless there are others after the end of '08, I don't know why we need to have this being affecting plats, 09, 10, but I don't know if there are reasons. Anyway, Commissioner Vliet.
No, I agree with the chair on that point. And I guess that's why last time we met, I was actually against granting any kind of extension. I thought the language that the council had in here previously was a good one. I don't know. And just reiterate, and not to belabor it, but we have one request from one property owner that wanted to do a long plat, and I didn't get I maybe should ask more questions, but I didn't even get a very good perspective of where he was at in the process, how much money he had put into it. I didn't see any displays. I didn't see kind of blueprints of what he wanted to do. And I'm sure Gary, you all have that probably. I should have asked for it. But that's why this discussion to me gets a little, it's tough, because we're trying to figure out a date by which we extend 1 year, 2 year, and how far back, and when when the Great Recession ended or started, or when it hit Bothell. And so kind of that's why and then while I'll probably be voting against any motion to extend it tonight, I know it probably will pass, but that's kind of why, to me, is just, I don't know, it's just hard to it's kind of hard to define. So,
Well, I think if you want to put a definite end date on there, you can certainly do that. And I think whether you chose 9 or 10 or 11 would be reasonable.
And the date that we're talking about, whether it's the end of 9 or the end of 10, is the date in which the preliminary plat approval occurred.
Correct.
That's what we're talking about.
Correct. So in other
And I think
words,
we should stay focused on that.
correct. So in other words, we could word it so that if you received your preliminary plat approval prior to December 31st, 2009 or
Right.
10, then you could automatically apply for a 1 or 2 year extension.
Right.
Can I throw something in
Yeah,
there?
Commissioner Clark.
The only thing I would add to that is any unexpired preliminary plat that was approved prior to December 31st, 2009, or whatever that date is, so that it doesn't
So that it's
appear that
clear.
we're allowing expired plats to, because you could
You could read
theoretically
it that way.
you could
Yeah, right.
reopen an expired plat. Or
Yeah, good point. So an unexpired plat. Do we need to?
So if you want to choose an end date and 1 or 2 years, then I think we can craft the language right now.
Yeah, I agree.
So let's talk about an end date. Go ahead, Commissioner Clark.
Well, let's figure this out. So currently it's 7 years. So any plat approved prior to or after 2008 would benefit from this, or this date 2008. If we use the date prior to 2009, that gives them till 2018. If we use 2008, that gives them till 2017. And a plat that was approved in 2009 is, as of right now, still valid through 2016, through that date in 2016. Right. So they're not imminently expiring. Right. I think it's really what we're focusing on are those oldest plats that are imminently expiring, which is the example that we have. The plat that we had the testimony on is one of those. So I would suggest that maybe that's the date.
12/31/2008.
Yeah, and that's just my thoughts. I'm not an economist. I don't know what the details around 2009 were, and I mean I'd be open to going a little further, but I think we need to cap it at some point.
Well, if we did it 2009, and it's got 7 years now, which means to the end of 16, and then had a 1 year, and then just a 1 year extension, that would include potentially more plats, and it would take them to the end of 2017. So how about that? How about again? That would be for those plats that have not expired and received preliminary approval up to December 31st, 2009, that currently have 7 years, where we would approve a one-year extension to the end of 17.
So that gives the 2008 plats essentially 1 year from,
Any 2009 and prior, any plat that has not expired.
So the way that would read would be, for non-expired plats which were approved prior to December 31st, 2009, a one-time automatic extension of 1 year shall be granted upon written request of the applicant prior to the preliminary plat expiration date.
I mean, and I don't know if we need to state that, but the fact is that without us doing anything, they have 7 years today.
Correct.
We're just basically cutting it off. We're not bringing it forward beyond those to the end of 09,
Correct.
and we're just granting a 1-year extension.
Correct.
the only thought I have on that, Commissioner Booth, is that only gives a 1 year extension to plats that were approved in 2008. As of right now, it gives 2 years for the 2009 plats, or it gives them 2 more years. It gives 2008 plats essentially 1 more year, and the question is that enough for a plat approved in 2008 to get? So I would.
So a 2008 plat would have 8 years, so they would be, whenever they were approved, it would be on the 8th year or 8th anniversary of that date.
Yep.
I mean, and again, I don't know the specific case, but whatever it was, it'd now be in 2016. I mean, my feeling is that's what I'm in support of. I mean, that's pretty well where I'm at, and I just think that they should be able to get it done by then. And I think it's showing some flexibility and understanding based on what happened. But I'm really open to comments. Commissioner Stahl.
Just a clarifying question. So how do we know how many plats this applies to? I mean, there's a fixed number that were filed in 2008, 2009, et cetera.
There was, and I haven't had time to look into our permit tracking.
But you
system.
were saying earlier, Gary, that there were a large number of plats that the city was approving in 08 and 09.
Well, not plats, but completed lots. So, and some of those were multifamily. Of those permits that I said people came in and actually picked up permits, some of those were multifamily complexes. So the 70 or 80 permits that we were handing out in 2011-12 wasn't necessarily for single lots.
Okay.
I really don't have a feel for how many it might affect, but my guess is not very many. And by that, I'm guessing probably less than a dozen.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't looking for an exact number, but I didn't know if we were talking about 3 or 300. So
No, it would be much closer to the 3, certainly, I think, and maybe as many as 10 or a dozen, but I don't have an exact number.
Mr. Lee.
Yes. So, with regards to Mr. Jamanka, so that to be clear, this would give him until October of next year. Is that right?
That's correct.
Provided that he got his request in before October 3rd of this year.
That's correct.
And so I want to make sure we've got the math all figured out here, and I apologize for belaboring the point, but as it exists right now, let's say that we make a recommendation today to the City Council. The City Council considers it on September 10th or whatever the date is, and it gets approved and in place at that point. The only 2008 plats that would even be eligible would be those plats that were approved after September 8th of 2008. So I think it pretty much eliminates because they would be expired already and wouldn't have the opportunity to put the written request in.
That's correct.
That's why I think it might be important to give all of the 2008 plats at least a year. And if we make it 2 years for the 2008 plats, then that gives them all of them at least a year. So does that make sense?
I think so. I believe that plats that have expired can't be unexpired.
Yeah, that's right. You're right.
They're done.
So there's a bunch of
We
plats
can't,
already
unfortunately, we
expired.
can't do anything for them, but you could also argue that we haven't heard from those folks. Their plats have expired.
That's a good point.
And we typically send out a notice ahead of time, either a year or 6 months, that their plats are going to expire. So most folks are aware of it.
That's true.
You are creating, you're creating a very, a finite window of approved plots that you're doing this for, which is fine. I mean, that's the purpose of it, I think.
Yeah, I think, given that, I think it clarifies it for me. I think I'm on board with what Commissioner Booth recommended.
So would you like me to read the language one more time?
Yep.
So the new language, the underlined portion would read, for non-expired plats which were approved prior to December 31st, 2009, a one-time automatic extension of 1 year shall be granted upon written request of the applicant prior to the preliminary plat expiration date.
And I think what I'm in favor of that language. I don't know if we need to vote on it or not, but I think we could just maybe go down the line and see who supports it. But I would like to have the city council know that we recognize their language, which had this 2014 date in it, but we were a little confused by it. And again, it seemed like it was extending 7, 8, potentially 9 years, because we were thinking of a 1 or 2 year extension to these plats all the way through the end of 2014. And I just want them to know we wrestled with their language, but we obviously like ours better.
If the commission wishes, I can add a specific finding that essentially says that.
Great, thank you. So I don't know if we need to vote on that, or if there's any further discussion or comments on it, or why don't we just go down? Commissioner Cabe.
Just one quick comment. Seems like we're making one specific amendment here to the language for one application. And I thought last week when we heard from the applicant, they were pretty clear that they needed 2 years. So I'm more in favor of 1 year, but I'm just wondering if we're modifying this and 1 year doesn't actually get them to where they need to go. It seems like a wasted exercise. So
Yeah.
I think you also heard from Mr. Jumonka, and I don't want to speak for him, but I think what his testimony said was that he would like the additional 2 years to be sure.
I guess I'm more on willing to grant an extension, but we want to create some urgency here, and he's had 7 years, and so I think I'm for sticking with 1 year. And I also recognize that between the time the city council votes on this and then the opportunity he may have, I don't know what his October date is, but there may be a very tight time window. But if this is this important to him, he should be on top of this, and he should actually come into you before October and say, on the very day the city council approves this, I'm applying for my extension. I mean, what else better does he have to do? He should be on top of this.
Well, we did meet with Mr. Jumonka back in, I think it was January or February, and encouraged him to prepare a final plat application to submit should he need to.
Right. Or in this case, it's going to be an extension request, right?
Correct.
So is there going to be a form that he needs to fill out, or is it just, an email that he needs to send in? I formally request an extension, or what's the process that he's going to have to go through to request this extension? Or is the extension just automatically
The language
granted?
is upon written request, so I think we would accept an email.
I mean,
But what we stressed to Mr. Jumonka was don't put all your eggs in the code amendment basket. We still encourage you, whatever happens, to be prepared to submit a final plat should you need to do that. And we have encouraged him all along to do that, or to be prepared to do that.
any other comments? Commissioner Cabe.
just to follow up, I'm fine with 1 year. I support that change. I would be interested in moving it to 2008. I don't think it's a big deal, but it seems like the market started to pick up in 2013. Those people have had 2.5 years by the time we get into 2016.
Right.
I don't know that we need to keep extending it out.
I agree. Commissioner Stedman.
I'm comfortable with the language that you just presented, and very comfortable with the 1 year extension on that as well.
Okay. Do we need to have a motion on and a vote, or?
You just need to reach consensus on the language, and then someone needs to make a motion to recommend to City Council. If you wish to put the specific language in your motion, you can certainly do that.
I think it would be good for us to have a motion. I know that Commissioner Vliet probably will not vote in favor of it, so let's give him the opportunity to put his vote on the record in that way, which I recognize.
Can I,
Commissioner Clark, yeah.
I just want to make two things real quick. One is that your language said for unexpired plats. I think we need to specify preliminary plat there. Is that correct?
We can certainly do that. We could say for unexpired, approved preliminary plats, just
Yeah.
to be specific.
Because a
Yeah.
plat could be interpreted as a final plat also. And then at the end, you said, I was going to suggest maybe something that might clarify your last sentence. Can you read that again, that last, at the written request of the owner, and then from there?
A one-time automatic extension of 1 year shall be granted upon written request of the applicant prior to the preliminary plat expiration date.
This may seem like splitting hairs, but maybe we could say, provided that that written request is received prior to the expiration of the plat.
I would agree with that the written request is received prior to the end of the expiration of the time period, and also can we just say how that written? I mean, is it implied that it's an email, or do we just state that?
I don't think we need to state that.
Okay.
Email is more common today than we receive very few letters from people
All right.
anymore.
And
We're happy to take
Can
letters.
we assume that the plat applicant knows which email address to send it to, and they're very clear on how to get a written request for an extension to the planning department?
I think so. They typically know how to find us.
All right.
So I will add, shall be granted, provided a written request of the applicant prior to the preliminary plat expiration date is received by the director. Or some sequence of wording like that
Yeah.
that states that.
Okay. I think we're ready.
Can
Commissioner
you,
Stahl.
can you read it just one more time in its entirety?
Sure. So I think I can get it here. For non-expired, approved preliminary plats, which were approved prior to December 31st, 2009, a one-time automatic extension of 1 year shall be granted, provided a written request is submitted by the applicant to the director prior to the preliminary plat expiration date. It's getting wordy, but I think it's still
No,
okay.
I liked it. You have a comment?
No, that's.
You good?
I'm good with it. I think it's there's a lot of clauses in there, but when I draw out the numbered line and take the notes and get them all, it makes sense on paper.
Okay. All right. Our engineer spoke. So, all right. So let's. Can we have a motion? And I don't think we need to repeat the language, but just say a motion to approve the language as.
I'll go for it. I'll make a motion to approve the language that we just heard regarding the preliminary plat approval expiration times.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Motion passes with a vote of 5-1.
I will probably use the term city instead of director for receiving just in case they submit it to the city clerk or somebody mistakenly.
Yep.
That'll cover us.
Yep.
Or the city attorney or.
Okay. Anything else with regards to this topic that we need to discuss? And, the public hearing was open. We don't have anybody in the room. Of course, the public can always provide feedback, but I think we're ready to close the public hearing at this point. So let's have a motion to close the public hearing for this item.
I motion we close the public hearing.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Public hearing is closed. I do not believe we have a study session, old business, no reports from staff, any reports from members. Is there anything else before we adjourn? Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.